All right, welcome back. We are continuing reading our Keystone finish line. Today we are on pages 164 and 165. And then you are going to answer these questions and they will be on a Google form for you. Okay? Uh, yep, six of them. Pay close attention when you're reading the graphs and the questions. All right, this is actually a tricky section. Take your time. Come talk to me during my office hours. Not too far. All right. I don't want to go too far here. Here, speciation. Last time we talked about the different things that cause evolution, different mechanisms. So now we are on what actually creates a new species. Evolution does not occur only to change existing species. Entirely new species also evolve. As a species become extinct, new and different species arise to replace them. Speciation is the formation of a new genetically distinct species from populations of existing species. Meaning, we don't just make a different looking version of an existing group, we take that existing group and turn them into a whole new group entirely. They are so genetically different that they can't even reproduce with the old one. Recall the definition of a population. A group of organisms of the same species that share a geographic area and breed with each other. Every population shares a gene pool, a set of gene alleles among its members. All right, we're talking about allele frequencies, how often those alleles show up in the group. Right? We care about the group's genes, not just the individuals. Species arise when a population splits or two populations are under different selective pressures. Eventually, members of one population stop mating with the other. Genes and alleles stop flowing between them. So we get this big group of people, and they split into two smaller groups of people, and they don't associate with each other. So group one will not reproduce with group two. Group two will not reproduce with group one. Their genes do not go back and forth. We got two separated pools of genetics. So one group will start to evolve one way and the other group will start to evolve a different way because they have different environments and they are living different ways. Even if they live in the same area, the way they live counts as a different environment. Sometimes the separation of a population is due to geographic isolation, meaning there's a river in between them so they can't get to each other. For example, a highway may divide what a single population of burrowing beetles into two populations. Speciation may also occur in the same area, such as when some parasites move on to a different host species. The parasites on a new host will only encounter others of the same host species. So again, fleas. If fleas jump from one dog to another, we now have two groups of fleas. Right? The fleas on one dog cannot reproduce with the fleas on the other dog because the two dogs went their own different ways. So they're going to reproduce in two different ways. Reproductive isolation prevents this population from mating with members of the original population. Right. Like I just said, the dogs walked away, so the fleas on dog one cannot reproduce with the fleas of dog two because they can't get to each other. As the separate populations evolve along separate paths due to natural selection, they become increasingly different. Eventually, they may be considered entirely separate species. So here, we got this split. We got these white stars and black stars, white stars and black stars. And for whatever reason, on this side, they live differently. So the black stars aren't doing too well. Over here, the green stars aren't doing too well. Come back in a few years or a few decades, few centuries, we may find entirely white stars and entirely black stars. When a single population is divided geographically into two, gene flow between them stops and the new populations evolve along different paths. This may eventually lead to the formation of entirely new species. This actually has happened among chimpanzees. a river flowed between two groups, and one of the groups living on the other side of the river lived differently. They behaved differently. And since they didn't mix with the original group, they kept living their own way, and eventually they started becoming their own kind of chimpanzee. We call them bonobos. Look them up. They are slightly different now. One definition of species is a group of organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. Organisms of different species cannot breed and produce fertile offspring due to isolating mechanisms. Right? That's an important key term here, guys. I brought this up in the vocab as well. Produce fertile offspring. Right? Two different species sometimes can have an offspring, but that offspring is not fertile, meaning it cannot grow up and have kids. The example I gave was a mule. A horse and a donkey are two different species, but they can have a mule, that's the offspring between a horse and a donkey. Mules cannot have kids. They're infertile. So horses and donkeys are two different species. This is due to isolating mechanisms, things that prevent this from happening. These are behaviors or physical characteristics that prevent mating and breeding between different species. Isolating mechanisms can take different forms. They can either prevent organisms from mating, or if they do mate, prevent healthy fertile offspring from developing. Right? So maybe they can't mate because there's a wall in the way. They can't get to each other. Or maybe they can mate, but their genetics don't match well enough to create a healthy offspring. Mating is avoided if members of two species are active at different times of day or mate only during different seasons. They may have evolved different mating calls or rituals, or they may mate or breed in different habitats. Yeah, maybe some birds only breed on low branches, some birds only breed on high branches. So when it comes to mating season, they just don't interact with each other. It's not that they can't, it's that they won't, because they're not in the right place. That's an isolating mechanism. If mating does occur, sperm from males of one species may not be able to reach the egg of the female of the other species. Even if the gametes do meet, fertilization may not occur, or the zygote that results from fertilization may not be viable. All of this is just fancy ways of saying their genes don't match well. All right, they can mate, they can get the sperm to meet the egg, but the genetics just don't line up. That's an isolating mechanism. It prevents them from reproducing. Sometimes closely related species are able to produce a hybrid offspring. The mule I just said, horse and a donkey. Usually the offspring is sterile, meaning they can't reproduce. For example, the mating of a horse and a donkey produces mules. I'm glad me and the book and I are on the same page here. Which cannot produce offspring on their own. All right, another example. A new bee species, which pollinates a particular flower, arises from a larger bee population that pollinates a different type of flower. So they're working on different flowers. That is a isolating mechanism. Explain why natural selection would favor the evolution of isolating mechanisms between these two species. And the book tells us, each species is adapted to pollinate a specific type of flower. If bees from the two species mated, their offspring may not be able to pollinate either flower very well. Isolating mechanisms prevent bees from both species from producing offspring that are less able to survive in their environment. So they could reproduce, but their offspring wouldn't survive because they can't make honey. That's just this one example. These mechanisms ensure that offspring have the adaptations of their parents and help the parents' alleles to be passed on to future generations. So if they do make this bee who can't make honey, then it won't survive, and those bad traits will not be in the gene pool anymore. So we don't have to worry about it. All right, like I said, we have these questions. These questions are based on the entire section. All right, so you do have these pages as a PDF. We read this first couple pages in a different video, and then the pages we just read together. And these questions are on a Google form. So find that Google form and answer there. See if I just want to point some things out. There was something I remember being really weird. I'll probably just come back later and explain in a different video if I can't find it here. Let's see. I think it was actually this thing. Cliff swallows. You don't even need to know this word. Keystone trick, by the way, guys. This is just a scientific word for cliff swallows. It's a bird. Right? You don't have to memorize that or you know how to pronounce it. Cliff swallows nest on bridges and overpasses along highways. Scientists collect data on the cliff swallow population, examining 134 adult birds found in nests and 104 adult birds found as roadkill. The data is shown in the graph. So the graphs are saying wing length. That's what they're measuring. Wing length of birds in the nest, living birds. And we see, like we would have seen in the notes, a lot toward the middle. Now, that's millimeters. 107 millimeters, 108 millimeters, 109 millimeters is average. And then we got a few really short ones and a few really tall ones, or really long ones. And then with the birds that were dead, we don't find too many dead ones with really short wings. We find a lot of them dead with the medium wings and fewer with the larger wings. That's what this is saying. In order for natural selection to act on a population, what must be true about the phenotypic variations seen in the graphs? Right. That is a tough question. I don't want to give you the answer. But say it again. In order for natural selection to act on the population, what must be true about the phenotypic variations seen in the graph? So think hard about how phenotypes and genotypes were affected by natural selection. Is natural selection acting on the cliff swallow population? Explain how the data support your response. So, are we actually seeing natural selection happen? And how would you know? And are the frequencies of the alleles that affect wing length likely to remain stable in this population? Explain. So are the frequencies of the alleles that affect wing length likely to remain stable? Meaning, are these numbers likely to stay the same? Explain your answer. All right. I will try to release a video going over this after it is due so you understand what was going on. So until then, good luck, guys.